All right, hello. Well, I'm trying out a new headset for the first time, so hopefully it goes well. I just actually tried it with a test video on YouTube, which I did not publish. So anyway, this is Chapter 2, Patterns of Crime, as I explained, and it's from your textbook written by Frank Smaliger, and PowerPoint, as you can see, created by Ellen Cohn. So I make sure we give credit where credit is due, since some of this stuff may leak out publicly, and make sure that everybody knows where it came from. And as I said before, Frank created a really cool, and I'm sure that the publisher, Pearson Prentice Hall, probably assisted with that, a really, really cool website that goes along with this textbook that has quizzes, it has information, it has links to all kinds of cool stuff that will help you here to find some of the things. And of course, I have my website at CJ Resources as well that has links to the crime data that we're going to talk about from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the Uniform Crime Report at the federal level, which there is an assignment that goes along with this chapter, which we'll probably do as a exercise in class rather than homework, where you're looking up specific types of crime data. I'm going to be probably modifying it because I've been using the same assignment for the last few years, and it actually mirrors the assignment that's in the intro class, so that those of you that just came from the intro class, it's like the same thing. So I'm going to not make it that easy for you because I don't want to bore everybody with, oh, I did this already. And it hasn't been long enough because you're coming from one quarter to the next. It hasn't been long enough for you to really see any changes in the data. It's actually a good assignment to do over again if you were doing this class like 2 or 3 quarters down the road or in a different calendar year where you could actually see trends that are going on. As you know, there's a lot of trends going on in criminal justice right now. There's a lot of people that claim that the level of crime is increasing, especially violent crime. We all know people are claiming that there's more violence against police officers, but at the same time, there's the Black Lives Matter movement that claims that there's more institutional racism and crimes against black people, specifically young African American males, that is done by the criminal justice system. And those are all things that there is data collected on that you can actually, if you do the research yourself, find out whether these people are using the data appropriately or making stuff up. There is a really awesome article in a magazine called National Review that talks about the concept called decarceration or mass incarceration, which is a mass incarceration is a suggestion that our criminal justice system is just wholly locking up all kinds of people, mostly African American males, and putting them in the prison system and basically ruining society. And there's some truth on the one hand to that, but there's a lot of mistruths or misstatements with regard to what's really going on. And I'm going to bring in the article, probably use it as an assignment for the class to change some of the older things that I've been using for the past couple of years teaching this class. I've actually been teaching this class for 5 years, as a matter of fact. And there's always something new, believe it or not. The first many chapters, as I discussed before in this book, go through various types of or theories of crime. That's from chapter 4 on up to I think chapter 9 or 10. The first chapter is just the overview that you just did. This one's about the numbers. Where do we get the numbers from? Which all of you that just came from intro basically should be well aware of this. And number 3 is about how, in detail, how criminologists conduct research. And as part of that lecture, or I should say part of the classroom portion of that class, I'm going to expose you to actual research documents from the field of criminology so that you can see what these people actually create and what they have to put into these research documents. And that may help you to better understand what it means to put together a true research paper on criminology. And then when I expose you to what our project is going to be for this course, maybe you'll have a better understanding of what you need to do it well and to do it correctly. So the history of crime statistics, considering how old our world is, gathering of crime statistics is a relatively new thing. Somebody named Thomas Malthus made inferences based on statistical demographics about 200 years ago. So he was looking at numbers and trying to infer what might be going to happen in society. And that's only 200 years ago. 200 years ago in the history of the world is a drop in a bucket. So we really have not been looking at the data for very long. Some other people, Andre Gury, 1802 to 1866, he actually calculated what we call a per capita crime rate in France in the early 1800s. And if you don't remember what per capita means, that's usually per 1,000 or per 100,000 people. So you can actually compare crime from one town to another. Because if you did it on sheer numbers, if you look at easy comparison for us here in the Delaware Valley, you look at the city of Camden, just across the river, and Philadelphia. And if you were to say, well, Camden had 31 murders, you could look at Trenton too, because I know some of you are from Trenton. Look at Trenton, had 31, 35 murders, and that's like, wow, that's a whole lot of stuff. If Philly had 31 murders, I think the police chief would be dancing in the streets, because you have differences in population. So if we're to be able to compare these different cities to see whether they're similar in their rates or not, is you come up with this rate based upon their population. So Gury was doing that in the 1800s. Ketelet, 1796 to 1864, and those dates basically, when you see those dates in something like this, that's the dates that these guys were on the planet, the dates that these guys were alive, birth and death. So Ketelet actually did a statistical analysis of crime in Europe, which is something that we do like crazy today. But we're talking about 17th century. He's doing statistical analysis in the 1800s. Thermic law, that was an idea of his that says crime varies with the seasons and the climate. And that's one of the things we're actually going to discuss later on in this course, that as far as environmental causes of crime, the weather is one of the few that you can actually link to differences in crime rates. And when you think about it, and we'll talk about this later in the course, when do you think there's more crime? In, say, January, when it's 15 degrees out and maybe a blizzard? Or in July, when it's 95 degrees out and everybody's outside sweating their butts off and getting pissed off easy? What do you think? That's kind of the idea of thermic law, that the seasons. There were also some theories about the moon. I don't know who came up with those, and the phases of the moon. We used to joke in policing, the full moon is when all the nuts come out. So there's theories based upon that as well. Anyway, these people led to the development of what we call the statistical school. There's people that actually started looking at numbers to see what was going on. And then, of course, by looking at what was going on, you also may try to infer what's going to happen in the future. If you see trends, if things are going up, does that mean it's going to continue to go up? And is something we have to worry about? If things are going down, does that mean we're doing a great job and we can back off a little bit? You can look at all kinds of stuff going on in our society today, whether it's crime, whether it's the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. People use data to determine what we need to do or not do. So crime statistics today, I mentioned in the intro, we have two major systems. And I say two because the second and third bullet points on this are actually part of the same system. So you have the National Crime Victimization Survey, the NCVS. It's conducted by the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Actually, the data collected by the Bureau of Census, because they have people that are good at that. They create a report called Crime Victimization in the United States. And you have the Uniform Crime Report, UCR program conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, also known as the FBI. They create a report called Crime in the United States. And then you have the National Incident-Based Reporting System, as you may recall, or NIBRS, N-I-B-R-S, also collected by the FBI. The data for UCR and NIBRS comes from reports of crimes to the police. So if you went out to your car this morning and found that it was broken into, and your ITT Tech tablet that you were going to use for your ebook is now gone, and you called the police to report that, that would hopefully eventually go into the UCR and the NIBRS database so that we could track those types of crimes. Now I say hopefully because one of the things we're going to find out about these databases as at the federal level, they are not mandatory. So there are in some states local agencies that do not report crime to the federal government. And a great example right here, and sometimes it's not because it's not required. The other thing it might be is because things fall through the cracks. If an agency doesn't do what they're supposed to do and doesn't report the crime to the federal government or the state police, however they're supposed to report it, and the state police or the federal government doesn't catch that they're not reporting, they sometimes don't go back to those people and say, yo, where's your data? And that actually happened with the borough of Pendle, which is right down the street here. One of our instructors, Joe Ciccio, is presently the chief of police in Pendle. And when he came on the job, one of the things that he found out that Pendle had not been reporting data to the Pennsylvania State Police for their uniform crime reporting system. So that was not a good thing. And when he contacted the state police to start submitting it, the state police said, oh, we thought you didn't exist anymore as a police department, which is quite possible. I mean, Pendle's a small town, one full-time cop, which is the chief, and like 7 or 8 part-timers. So it's very possible that a police department could actually cease to exist, and the data might be reported by another agency that's covering it, like the Pennsylvania State Police could have taken over, Middletown Township, Langhorne, one of these other local police departments could have contracted with Pendle to take over. Ben Salem, which is also bordering to the south, could take over. So that's all possible. Actually, I think Pendle is completely surrounded by Middletown, so Middletown would probably be the best option to take over policing in Pendle. But that's not what happened. But the state police did not know that they weren't reporting. So one of the things that a problem with the UCR is that not every agency reports it. And the other problem is that not every person who goes out to their car and finds it was broken into is going to report it. And we're going to talk about other crimes that may go unreported later on. All right, so there are some obviously programmatic problems with the data. Bureau of Justice statistics and FBI information in those data sources that we just talked about differ significantly. We can't, hold them side by side and compare exactly. They look at crime from a different perspective. They also have some what you would call procedural and methodological differences. And basically, what do they do? How do they get their information? All right, the Uniform Crime Report is collected from crime reports that are passed along from police departments, where the NCVS is collected by a survey, where they're calling people up and saying, oh, hello, I'd like to speak to the head of the household, or I'd like to speak to someone. I am collecting data for the Bureau of Justice Statistics for the NCVS, National Crime Victimization Survey. Could I ask you a few questions? And that's how they get their information. And the other thing is you have definitions of crime that might differ. One might have one definition of, let's say, a rape, while the other has another definition of a rape, which may or may not include certain types of acts, which we'll get into later. So the UCR program, I've talked about it quite a bit already. They had a term called the Crime Index, which actually gave you a number for all crimes. That number was an X number of offenses per 100,000 people, so you could look at a town and say, okay, the crime index for Middletown was 145, and the crime index for Pendle was 147. So based upon the population, Pendle actually had a higher crime rate, even though it's a significantly smaller town. The actual use of the term crime index was discontinued in 2005. But if you look at data before 2005, you'll see that number used. They also, as part of the UCR, have a list of index crimes, and this system is actually changing. So when you start looking at the data, you might see some differences. But index crimes are what are considered the 8 most serious crimes. And these are what they call Part 1 crimes. And as you can see, these are our traditional violent crimes and property crimes, the most serious ones: murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and arson. And arson and motor vehicle theft were actually added later on, more recent. But these are the ones that you'll see in, if you look at old UCR data, listed as Part 1 crimes. All right, important term, cleared crimes. What's a cleared crime? Cleared is a crime that we say, hey, there's a solution to this. Now, it can be done in a couple of ways. Either someone was arrested, or the perpetrator is known, but arrest is not possible. And you could think of some tragic circumstances recently. Say there was a trooper in Kansas that was just killed a few days ago, and eventually the perpetrator was not caught, wound up in a gunfight with the police and was killed in the gunfight. So that case is cleared because that person is dead. They can't be arrested. Same thing with the situation involving the reporters. I believe it was South Carolina, where the female reporter was talking to a lady from the Chamber of Commerce, and she had her male cameraman and a former media person, guy who used to work with these people at the same station, came up and shot all 3 of these people, killing the cameraman and killing the reporter and seriously injuring the lady. He then fled the scene, and wound up, when the police caught up with them, shooting himself on the highway and dying. That case is also cleared because we know who the perpetrator is, but we cannot arrest him. All right. So the clearance rate is another term that you'll hear used a lot with regard to counting crimes. The clearance rate is the proportion of reported or discovered crimes within a given offense category that are cleared. So if Pendel reports 10 crimes and 10 of them are cleared, well, the clearance rate is 100%. So that's the number for the clearance. So you have different ratios, proportion of. So if it was 5 that were cleared and 10 that occurred, then you'd have 50% clearance rate. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? I hope it does. If it doesn't, write down the question. It's something that one of the students actually asked me at the end of last quarter. Said she was really concerned about the online lecture because she likes to ask questions during the lecture. Well, we're going to have a lot of discussions in class. So what I suggest is, if you have those questions, write them down. While you're watching this video, try at least to watch it while you're not distracted by a whole lot of other things like your children, your spouse, doing it at work, whatever, unless you can focus on it. Or watch it more than once, but you should, or have available like a notepad or something. So, well, I didn't understand what he meant about that clearance rate. I want him to explain it more. So maybe you just write down clearance rate. And when you come to class, you'll say, hey, Mr. Plunkett, can you explain in a little bit more detail what you meant by this clearance rate thing? So write down your questions. UCR problems. Again, it's a reporting program. It only includes crimes reported to the police or crimes that the police know about. So it seriously underestimates the true nature of crime in the United States. I think one of the crime funnel that we show in one of the classes actually showed that only like half the crime is reported. So that's not too good. So the UCR has some basic serious issues. And what do we call the number of crimes that are not reported? Well, that's a term called the dark figure of crime. Dark figure of crime are those crimes that are not reported to the police. Okay. Why don't people report crimes? Well, sometimes they might be fearful of the person that did the crime. They don't want to be attacked for reporting. Maybe whatever they did, they feel partially responsible for the fact that it happened. So there's some shame. They don't want their families to know that they were involved. They're just fearful. And a lot of times this will happen in sexual assault or rape cases, especially if the person somehow feels that they put themselves in a situation where their behavior precipitated the action. There also might be a fear of not being believed. Let's say, someone is attacked or assaulted by a well-known person, and they're afraid that, nobody's going to believe that he did this to me. Classic case. Can you think of a good example? There's a couple of them out there. One of them is Bill Cosby. Look at the history of Bill Cosby. We have over a 20 to 30 year period, women now claiming that they were assaulted by Bill Cosby. And many of them, if you were to talk to them face to face, will tell you that one of the reasons that they did not report what happened was they thought, hey, this guy everybody knows, everybody loves. He's a TV personality, he's a comedian, he's Dr. Huxtable, he was the spokesperson for Temple University. Who's going to believe me when I tell that he raped me or he assaulted me? Because a lot of his victims were young women, some of which who actually came to him for advice and career advice, and he allegedly drugged them and then sexually assaulted them. So yeah, there's some shame there, putting themselves in that situation. There's certainly fear that people are not going to believe them and and tear them up. They also may fear further participation in the criminal justice system, because that is something that's scary. There are a lot of good things that have happened over the years with victim advocacy. Some of you might be interested in doing those things. But the criminal justice system is a scary thing. You got to go to court, you got to sit in the courtroom, you got to testify before a bunch of people as to what happened. There was a recent rape case involving a young woman at a I believe it was a college campus, where she was raped by a very well-known, high-achieving student. And certainly there's a lot of fear there, but she actually had the fortitude and strength to go out there, the courage, if you will, to testify in open court with regard to what happened to her. All right, NIBRS. NIBRS started in 1998, funded through a Federal Crime Identification Technology Act. It's, believe it or not, it's 2015. NIBRS is still being phased in. There's a lot of good information that's now available in NIBRS. And why is this change important? Because now we're looking at incident-driven data. It collects data on circumstances surrounding each criminal incident. So as opposed to the UCR would collect, okay, there was a murder. Okay, that goes in a UCR, there's one murder. 2 murders in a UCR. So you would be able to say, okay, we had a total of 310 murders in Philadelphia in a given year. Or in my town, 2 murders in Mount Laurel, which was a 200% increase over the year before. That's just the data. Well, in the NIBRS system, we collect all kinds of other things about that crime. Okay, where did the crime occur? Was it in a residential property? Was it in a commercial property? What was the point of entry to the property? Was it through a door? Was it through a window? Was it an open door? Was it a locked door? What type of weapons were used? Was it a gun? Was it a knife? Was it a baseball bat? So all these different things, and it goes on and on and on. We even have data we collect with regard to the relationship between the victim and the offender. And all this data is collected, which can be very helpful later on, especially for those, and remember next week, the next chapter 3 has to do with research. With this data being collected, it makes it much easier for researchers to go and look and see if there are any true patterns, or see if there are some things that are related. Say you had a pattern of burglaries in a community. Well, short-term crime analysis, if I want to help solve these, in the short term, I'm collecting all this data, maybe I can find a pattern that leads me to this specific mode of operation, or MO, that maybe leads me to the criminal. Long term, it may help me figure out what we need to do to address the crime problem, or where is our crime problem really occurring so that we can address it. And certainly if we're collecting the data on a national level, we can see patterns nationally as well. So NIBRS is extremely useful in that regard. They revised the definitions of crimes. They came up with 46 offenses in Group A, which they created 22 crime categories. Then they have 11 in Group B, which they only collected data from arrests. And those, obviously, some of those would be those crimes that we usually only find out about when we're arresting somebody. Because I say prostitution. Raise your hands. How many of you, if you went to a prostitute, would report it? Or if you were a prostitute, would you report it? And who else is going to report it? So prostitution is one of those things where we don't know about it until we arrest somebody. Pretty much the same thing with drug sales, drug arrests, drug use. Those crimes are recorded when they happen, as opposed to, say, a burglary where someone would report it. You know, they come home from work, they found the front door kicked in, and then they report it. Much more detail than the UCR, and again, you have all kinds of information. Hate or bias crimes. This is another measure that's collected at the federal government level, but it's also collected at each of the state levels, where they look at hate crimes. And of course, the definition of hate crimes, the UCR has their own definition. Different states have their definitions, and they have special reporting systems. And their collection is mandated by the Hate Crime Statistics Acts of 1990. Hate crimes, we're talking about various hate groups, maybe the Ku Klux Klan, Aryan Nations. You know, these groups existed for many years, but keep in mind that most hate crimes are not committed by hate groups. Majority of hate crimes are committed by individuals. The data is showing us that usually they're teenagers, primarily young males acting alone, young white males. The hate crimes committed by young white males acting alone or in groups. Although some would suggest that there are other examples of hate crimes committed by other groups that for whatever reason don't get a lot of attention. But hate crime is basically more on an individual level than these hate groups that we're aware of doing it. All right, NCVS, which, as you may recall, they don't put it on the slide, stands for National Crime Victimization Survey. Say that to yourself. National Crime Victimization Survey. That's the NCVS. Started in 1972. Again, it's created through interviews. So it actually may collect information on unreported crimes, because if they're calling people up on the phone, hey, Mr. Jones, can I talk to you about any crime? Have you ever been a victim of crime? And a person says yes, then they go on and conduct their survey. And that person may never have reported it to the police. So some suggest that is a more accurate measure of the incidence of crime, because we're actually getting a hold of people that were victims of crime. But there are some catches, and when we learn more about research, we'll understand that although they're calling people up and they're getting information about whether or not they were victims of crime, they can't call everybody. So when you're doing a survey, regardless of whether the survey is what ice cream you like or what coffee you like or who you want to vote for a political office, like surveys right now, political environment tells us a lot about surveys. Look at the data. If you look at, Donald Trump, and I hope nobody's saying, Donald Trump. I know there's at least one person in this class that can't stand Donald Trump, but he's up in the polls. The polls are surveys. They're asking people, who would you vote for if you were to vote today? Donald Trump's in the lead, Ben Carson is second, and then everybody else trailing behind him. Keep in mind that they didn't call up everybody in the country to ask that question. They called up a sample of people. And then what they do is something called extrapolation. They'll take that sample and then, using statistical analysis, then tell us that, okay, 50% of the people surveyed said that they would vote for Mickey Mouse for president. And they extrapolate that as to mean that 50% of the public would do the same thing. But that's through statistical analysis. Those of you that are going to go on for bachelor's and master's degrees will learn to love statistics. I hope you do. Uh, it was a very difficult course when I took it for my master's program, but it's something that's very important if you decide at some point that you want to be involved in research. All right, so who collects the NCVS? As I mentioned already, it's collected by the Census Bureau. They call like 42,000 households, talk to 76,000 people, usually follow these people at 6-month intervals for 3 years, and it includes anyone aged 12 or older. So just looking at those parameters, we know that there's going to be some severe lacking of information, where the UCR data, if anybody assaults a child and we know about it, it's probably going to get reported. Where in this particular thing, if you're under 12, you're not included in this survey, so that crimes against children are not going to be included here as well. So it gathers information on crimes, victims, and crimes. So what's included? All right, violent crimes, it includes rape, or in most states now it's called sexual assault, personal robbery, aggravated and simple assault. Property crimes, it includes household burglaries, personal and household theft, and motor vehicle theft. It does not include murder, arson, crimes against businesses, or crimes against children under 12, as I mentioned previously. So it's going to give us some of the crime picture, but certainly not all of it. Certainly not the homicide one, although that's where, if you look at them both, if you take the UCR and the NCVS together, that gives you a decent picture, but not a totally clear picture, if you get what I'm saying. So like with regard to homicides, probably all homicides are reported, unless someone happens to disappear and it's never been deemed that they were murdered and we never find the body. Most homicides are reported. Even times when people are missing and they start searching, they may declare it a homicide, like that poor young lady over from Mount Laurel back in, I guess it was January. Her name was Crippen Crosby, who was killed by her husband. She was missing for several days, and then eventually they said it was a homicide, although they had not found the body. So sometimes you can have, if you have enough evidence, you can suggest that there was a homicide even without the body. But usually that data is pretty accurate. Car thefts are pretty accurate as well, because most people, when your car gets stolen, you report it. But there are a lot of things that people don't report. And rape, personal robbery, and assaults are certainly some of them. If you know you're assaulted by a member of your family, are you always going to run off to the police and report it? Probably not. So keep that in mind. If somebody steals something out of your car, do you always report it? Probably not. In the UCR, however, when they're talking to you on the phone and say, well, have you ever had anything stolen from your vehicle? And you say, oh yeah, I had 50 cents stolen one day out of my ashtray. Did you report it to the police? No, I never reported it. Some of the critiques of the NCVS is you possibly have over-reporting. If you're calling somebody up on the phone and you're asking a bunch of questions, well, maybe they have their own ideas and they come up with all kinds of stuff that maybe never happened. The other thing is the definitions of crime in the NCVS do not necessarily correspond to what the actual crimes are in the states, as you'll find out in criminal law. So someone, have you ever been assaulted? And somebody says yes. Well, maybe they were just pushed, where under New Jersey law, that's not an assault. But the NCVS may carry it as an assault. And also, another problem with the NCVS is they actually changed it. Just like the FBI changed the UCR and is working on NIBRs, the NCVS has made some changes over the past few years that make it hard to look back and compare the data with prior years. All right, major crime shifts. And this particular slide doesn't bring us up to today, as we see some crime shifts today, but some of the major ones in history. The early 1940s, there was a sharp decrease in crime, mainly believed to be a function of the fact that most of the young males went off to World War II. So they weren't here in the country committing crimes. And as you may recall, and we're going to talk about this later on, that most of your crimes are committed between people, by people like 15 to 25 years of age, and you start to not commit crimes after the age of 25. So if we're sending all those people overseas to be involved in a war, they're not here committing crimes. 1960s to 1990s, there was a recorded dramatic increase in crime. Why? Well, we got all these World War II vets coming home. We got them all having kids. By the 60s, these kids are becoming teenagers and young adults and getting involved in crime. And you got people. There was a lot of kids born between in the 60s. So you have a lot more people. My understanding is those numbers are starting to drop. So you might see a crime drop as a result of what they say from 91 to 2003, baby boomers aging out. We also had in the 60s to the 90s increased reporting and data collection. So another way you're going to see increases in crime is because we're getting better at finding out about it. And of course, the 60s was a very tumultuous period in our time, especially with the Vietnam War and a lot of protests, the civil rights movement. So we had a lot more crime to talk about. 91 to 2003, decrease in crime. Again, baby boomers aging out. Stricter laws, expanded justice system, maybe more focus on certain things and cause crime to go down. Economic expansion, and this is one we're going to look at later on down the road. If there are more opportunities for people to make money legitimately, is it possible that it also reduces the amount of crime? Changing demographics, family planning. If we have more family planning and maybe less children growing into those ages where they commit crimes, then we have less people available to commit those crimes. Next crime cycle, well, we're probably in it right now. It's claimed right now that there is a increase in violent crimes. And you look at some of the causes, and over the next several weeks we're going to be looking at some of the causes, especially when we get to the socio-economic causes and sociology of crime. We'll look at these kind of things, but some suggested causes in the next crime cycle: economic uncertainty, increased unemployment, a growing teen population, putting more criminals back on the street, influence of gangs, people copycatting certain things, and social disorganization after natural disasters. This might be like Hurricane Katrina and the level of crime that occurred after that. Hurricane Sandy, there was a slight increase in some areas of New Jersey and other parts, I think Long Island after that. And you do have that. Earthquakes, hurricanes, there's crime that usually is attributed to goes along with it. Crime problem. So do you think that the crime rates accurately measure the extent of crime in the United States? Some would say no, they don't. Official rates suggest crime is decreasing, but the rates are only based on a small group of crime and don't usually count drug offenses, although our president just recently said that the majority of our population, our prison system, are all drug offenders, which the article that I mentioned from National Review suggests that that's not necessarily true. Some people would say we should look at the correctional population to give us a bigger picture of crime. Look at the people that got caught, look at what they're in for, and use that as crime data. And then, of course, the other thing is we might look at what crime, if we want to forecast crime, if these people are coming out and we figure out what the recidivism rate normally is, what type of increases in crime will we expect if people that were locked up during a high crime period, and if they're all going to be released at about the same time, are we going to have another high crime period that's caused because all of a sudden we got all these bad guys on the street? It's a big issue, and there's a lot of debate going on right now with regard to how we deal with criminals. Because some people suggest that just putting people in a prison system, not affording them a lot of opportunity while they're there, just makes them better criminals, and they come out in the street and they're just going to commit more crime. That we really need to have more programming, more use of community corrections like probation to help these people reintegrate into society. And like I said, the National Review article that I'm going to have you read really gets into that topic a little bit more. Crime in the world context. This course doesn't really get into crime all over the world, but it's suggested that through the data that's available that the crime rate in the United States is much higher than other industrial democracies. So what are we talking about, industrial democracies? Maybe Germany, Great Britain, countries like that that have a good economy going on. Uh, Probably most of Europe. Elliot Curry argues that the drop in crime is a falling off from an extraordinary peak. So the decrease in crimes that we saw over many years, which some people suggest has started to go back up, was that our crime was really, really, really high, and it was kind of coming back to normal, and that's why we saw a crime decrease. Also, some people suggest that also the levels of violence in the United States are still unreasonably high. And certainly I think we probably all agree with that. We all have a fear of going through certain neighborhoods. Some of you actually live in those neighborhoods. We see on the news every day about attacks and murders, homicide, rapes, whatever. And I think most of us would agree that there's too much of that going on. Criminality Index is another way that some people look at the actual extent of crime. So we look at what the actual crime rate is plus what we call the latent crime rate. And I mentioned this earlier. The latent crime rate is the rate of crime calculated on basis of crimes likely to be committed by those incapacitated by the system. Now, what does incapacitation mean? Everybody should know. Incapacitation is when we take the person out of the ability to commit crime. So when we lock somebody up, one of the things that we do is incapacitate them because they're not out in the street with the ability to commit crime. The concept of the Criminality Index is we have to look at the actual crime rate, what's going on right now, and what potentially could happen when all those people that are in prison are released. All right, now we want to look at the definitions in the UCR, and this might be a good time if you're watching this at home. Good time to take a break. Go to the bathroom. If you're a smoker, which you should stop because it's bad for your health, grab a smoke. If you need to get something to eat or drink, this might be a good time to do that. And I'm going to take 2 seconds from my recording just to grab a drink real quick. Okay, continuing. You probably didn't even notice to stop because I paused my recording so I could take a swig of my coffee. Because when I do these videos, it's amazing. I just go on and on and on and on. Unlike in the classroom, because you don't want to stop to take a drink while you're recording a video. So anyway, now we're going to go through the different types of crimes that are in the UCR and how are they defined. So homicide. You'll learn in criminal law what the specific legal definition of homicide is. But homicide versus murder. Homicide is defined as the willful killing of one human being by another. Now, willful killing simply means that the person did it because they wanted to or they had to. Where murder is a criminal or unlawful homicide with killing without legal justification or excuse. Now, of course, some people, especially today when we look at the issue with police officers killing suspects and other types of things going on, is some people say that no killing is justified. That any time that someone is killed, there should have been another way to deal with it. Well, that's probably easy for people that are not there to say, but there are such things as justifiable homicides. Some of you, I'm sure, have your carry permits. Some of you are considering that. Some of you are planning to become police officers. Some of you may have guns in your homes. Let's say that circumstance where you are home alone, maybe you and your baby, your child, and somebody breaks into your house and they're about to attack you, and you shoot them dead. All right, you just killed somebody, which is a very, very serious thing, and that is a homicide. But it's not criminal. It's a homicide. It's a justifiable homicide because you acted in accordance with the law to defend yourself or someone else. All right, so that's the difference between just a homicide and a murder. Homicide is whenever someone is killed. A murder is when that's a criminal or unlawful homicide. Do you understand the difference? Homicide, one person kills another person. Murder, one person kills another person and it is a violation of the law. Justifications would be self-defense being one of them. Types of murder, and when you get to criminal investigation, you're going to be concerned with this. And if some of you did a trial recently in your intro class, the types of murder. First degree, basically when someone plans or premeditates a murder. And that could be, in some cases, people have been charged with first degree murder, even if they did it, their planning was like 2 minutes right beforehand. They plan to kill somebody. It doesn't necessarily have to be that I planned for weeks to kill somebody. It just could be that before I pulled the trigger, I planned to kill them. Second degree, crime of passion. Now, here you can compare first and second degree. Crime of passion, you're married or you have boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. You come home and you find them in bed with someone else you don't know. Now, a planned, premeditated situation would be you saw what happened, you saw what's going on, you said, you know what? I'm going to kill him. And you do it. The second degree, crime of passion, is you had this overwhelming anger and you just reacted and killed them. Very minute difference in that situation. And a prosecutor in that kind of case is going to try to go for the first degree, but a jury might see that it was second degree, and certainly a defense attorney is going to go for second degree, because in most places second degree is not going to get you the death penalty. Third degree is negligent homicide or involuntary manslaughter. So third degree is you did something, and there's sometimes different levels, but you did something that you knew had the tremendous potential to kill somebody. You may not have planned or premeditated killing them. It wasn't an anger situation. It is something that you did that you knew could kill them. So say that you shoot somebody during a robbery. Did you actually plan to kill that person? Probably not. So it might be involuntary manslaughter or negligent homicide. Let's say, and these cases have happened, you have a firearm, you go out in your backyard on your picnic table, and you decide to clean it. And I think this happened to a police officer not too long ago, a couple of years ago in one of the suburban towns around here. You go outside, you decide to clean your firearm, but you were stupid and you didn't unload it first, and you let a round go, and it goes through the fence and kills your neighbor. That would be an involuntary or voluntary manslaughter. And in criminal law, you'll get into the distinctions. For the purpose of the UCR and the NCVS, they use their specific definitions to determine whether it goes into the category or not. Felony murder, killing during the commission of another felony. So this is an interesting one because you can be charged with first-degree murder even in that situation that I talked about with the robbery that you shot somebody because of the fact that you were committing a robbery at the time. The other thing is someone who is involved in that robbery but does not pull the trigger can also be charged with the murder. So let's say you and two friends decide to go rob the 7-Eleven. Two of the friends go inside. One has a gun, which hasn't shown yet. The other doesn't, and maybe they didn't even realize that the other guy had a gun. They tell the third person to stay out in the car and be ready to take off as soon as we come running out. So during the course of what transpires inside, the guy with the gun pulls the gun. The clerk reacts, trying to go for a gun under the counter or whatever, and the guy with the gun shoots the clerk. The clerk dies. It's possible that the guy that pulled the trigger is going to get charged certainly with first or third degree murder. But the other two guys, the guy who's in the store with them, if we can show that he knew they were going to commit a robbery, could be charged with felony murder. And the guy outside waiting to drive the car, or girl, and maybe one of you ladies is out there driving the car, could also be charged with murder under the felony murder statute if it's shown that you actually knew what was going on. It's a whole nother matter is if you're all driving together and, hey, yeah, let's stop at a 7-Eleven, get a cup of coffee, get a Slurpee, whatever, and you decide to stay in the car and you have no idea what's going on. Well, that would not be a felony murder. Of course, obviously the prosecutor is going to try to show that you did know what's going on. your defense attorney is going to try to show the otherwise. And the only way that's going to be able to prove that is if the guy who actually knew he was committing the murder says, no, I didn't tell her what I was going to do, or I didn't tell him what I was going to do. But criminal homicide and murder that goes into the UCR is going to be these things. So there's actually a question on the final and intro, and also in this course, that asks you what doesn't go. And one of the ones that doesn't go is non-negligent homicide, because non-negligent is anything that's above this. All right, forcible rape. 3 categories in the UCR NIBRS. Forcible rape, which is, most people understand it to be somebody using force to commit a rape. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean force. It could be threats. Statutory rape doesn't matter whether there was force used or a threat. If the person was under a certain age, then that's considered a rape under the forcible rape in UCR. And attempted forcible rape. So if you tried it but you were not successful, it still gets counted. And this section is all about what gets counted. As far as the definitions, you want to look to your criminal law class for actual definitions of what constitutes a rape. And we can certainly discuss it, but what these definitions and these categories are for is what does the UCR actually count. All right. Other types of rape: spousal rape, gang rape, date rape, same-sex rape. These are things that we're aware of. UCR actually didn't count same-sex, and that's being changed. So spousal rape, at one point that wasn't even a crime, where as long as if you were married, it was expected, where now it's a crime. Gang rape, we're talking about, and a bunch of people ganging up on one person. Date rape, you're on a date and the person decides to go beyond where you want to go with them. All right, rape motivation. And we're going to talk later on down the road about the criminology of rape. You bring it up here. Contemporary criminology sees rape as a power, not necessarily a sex thing. Rapists demean victims to feel powerful, but some scholars are actually looking back that some rapists are actually looking for sexual gratification. Robbery. All right, robbery is defined as the unlawful taking or attempted taking of property that is in the immediate possession of another by force or threat of force, or by putting the victim in fear. All right, so, and generally states' statute definitions are similar. So robbery, for the most part, your robberies, whether it's in Georgia or New Jersey or New York or whatever, are all going to get counted the same. And this is one of my pet peeves, is robbery, because people use the term robbery all the time. In the UCR and in the state statute, robbery has to be the threat, the taking or attempted taking of property from a person. So if somebody breaks in your house and steals your stuff and you're not home, that's not robbery. We're going to get into what that is in a minute. Anybody know what it is? Say it. Okay. So the NCVS definition also includes attempted robberies, where in the UCR it does not. All right. Some different categories that people use: highway or street robbery, so something that happens outside, on the road somewhere. Strong arm robbery. Strong arm robbery is a confusing term for some people because they don't know what it means. It just means that I didn't use a gun or a knife. I didn't use a weapon. I used my hands, fists, and feet. Armed robbery is when I use some type of weapon. Now keep in mind, a weapon could be anything. A weapon could be a baseball bat. It doesn't have to be a gun. All right, assault. Assault defined as, or aggravated assault, the unlawful attack by one person upon another for the purpose of inflicting severe or aggravated bodily injury. So in some states by statute, they're going to cover aggravated assault based upon the type of device you used. Like if you try to run somebody over with your car, even if they don't get hurt seriously, it could be considered aggravated assault. If you shoot somebody, even if you miss or you don't seriously injure them, it might still be aggravated assault. A simple assault is an attack without a weapon, resulting either in minor injury or undetermined injury requiring less than 2 days of hospitalization. This is the UCR definition. So the difference between aggravated and simple assault has to do with the level of injury, usually, but also with the potential injury. So if you use a gun, there's still the potential for serious injury, so it's still considered aggravated assault even if they're not injured seriously. Same thing, it says attack without a weapon. Well, if I punch you in the face and I break the orbit around your eye, causing serious bodily injury, that is an aggravated assault. So there does not have to be a weapon involved for it to be aggravated. Burglary. All right, this was my pet peeve one. What was the answer to what happens? Somebody breaks in your house, steals your stuff, you're not home? It's a burglary. Unlawful entry of a structure to commit a felony or a theft. Use of force is not required. So there doesn't have to be breaking and entering, as you might see in the common law, talked about breaking and entering. And in criminal law, you'll get into that. It just requires that you enter a structure. Could be a house, could be a business. Some states actually include cars in their burglary statutes. New Jersey actually did that, but we didn't count them as burglaries because then our UCR stats would have been like through the roof. Use of force is not required. So I don't have to kick the door in. If the door's unlocked and I walk in and I steal stuff, it's a burglary. Keep in mind, you don't have to steal stuff for it to be a burglary. If I go into a property to commit a rape, if I go in a property to scrawl my name on a window because I hate somebody, there's still a burglary involved, plus whatever the other crime is. Categories: forcible entry, attempted forcible entry, or unlawful entry without force. Larceny. I steal stuff. Taking of people's property. So you're not using force, so it's not a robbery. You're not going into their property when you don't belong there, into the house or whatever when you don't belong there, so it's not a burglary. It's just stealing stuff. So let's say in a classroom, you leave your iPad on a table somewhere, and you walk out of the room, and the instructor does not lock the door. Somebody walking by sees the iPad, walks in and steals it. That is a larceny. Now, there's some tricky things there. If the person was a student or a staff member who was supposed to be in the building at the time and they were there legitimately and they steal the property, then it's a larceny. If, however, the person was someone off the street who thought, hey, there's a school there, I bet you there's a lot of cool stuff that the students have in the school, why don't I sneak my way in there and steal something? That would actually be a burglary because the person went into the building where they didn't belong and then they stole something. So you'd have a burglary, but you could charge them with both burglary and larceny. But keep in mind, in the UCR, they have a hierarchy. So that's another reason why the data is not really accurate, because in a UCR, if somebody commits, let's say somebody breaks into a house, murders the homeowner, steals their stuff, breaks a window, and commits some other silly stuff while they're there, the most serious crime is the only one that's going to wind up in the UCR. And the most serious crime would be the murder. Even though you had a murder, you had a burglary, you had a theft, you might have had a rape, you had a criminal mischief, but the data is only going to show you that one thing. So keep that in mind as well. In NCVS, they have two different categories of larceny, where the UCR only has one. So in the NCVS, you're talking about something that happens in a household, or something that might happen, say, a shoplifting, personal type of deal. All right, motor vehicle theft. Motor vehicle theft is a theft or attempted theft of a motor vehicle. I think we all understand what that is. That's considered a motor vehicle theft. You come out to go to school in the morning, and your car's not there. That's a motor vehicle theft. Depending upon the state, you led your car to somebody and they never bring it back. That's a motor vehicle theft. We also had a statute in New Jersey called unlawful taking of the vehicle, or taking the vehicle without owner's consent. So like if your kids took the car for a joyride, or somebody took the vehicle for a joyride and then parked it later on, it wouldn't be considered a motor vehicle theft. It was called joyriding. Carjacking is a stealing of an occupied car. Basically, that's a robbery. A lot of times it involves a weapon. Victim is frequently injured or killed. I think we'd have to look at the current data on carjacking to see what the number of people that are injured or killed in carjackings are. But considering that it is when somebody uses force, sometimes a weapon, to steal that vehicle, the likelihood that somebody's going to get hurt is serious. Now, this particular event could be categorized as a motor vehicle theft, or it could be categorized as a robbery. UCR does not have a count for carjacking. So you may not be able to research very easily how many carjackings occurred in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, wherever, because the UCR doesn't count them that way. Arson. Basically, arson is somebody who burns someone else's property. All right, any willful or malicious burning or attempt to burn with or without intent to defraud a dwelling house, which means place where somebody lives, a public building, a motor vehicle or aircraft, personal property of another. So in the UCR or NIBR system, whenever you burn somebody else's property, it's an arson. Now, you could actually be charged with arson if you burned your own property as well. And most of the time when people do that is to do insurance fraud. But you don't have to have insurance fraud. That's what this is saying, with or without intent to defraud. You don't have to have a fraud going on for it to be arson. So let's say, I give you an F in this course, and you can't continue in criminal justice. And remember that this is the last time this course is going to run, so everybody needs to pass. But that's on you. You got to do the hard work to get there. But let's say you fail, and you feel that because I failed you, which you really failed yourself, but because I failed you, you hate me and you want me to pay back, and you decide to firebomb my house. That's an arson. Let's say, on the other hand, I really am tired of paying my mortgage, and I'm sick of living with my wife, and I just want to get out of the situation, and I burn my own house. We actually had that happen in Mount Laurel a number of years ago. That would also be an arson. Of course, at the same time, I'm going to collect insurance, so there's that fraud aspect in it. So, there's different things that are considered to be arson. Now, arson is not in the National Crime Victimization Survey. Keep that in mind. It's not there. Arson, the motivations for arson, some people do it because it gets their rocks off. You have people who sexually get excited, people who just get excited, period, or it's just a thrill and an exciting thing to do. Like driving fast down a highway. Some people get excited by committing arson. You have people that want to damage property. You have people that are sick in the head that, they love fire. You have people that, like I suggested, if you wanted to burn my house down because I gave you an F. You have people that are what they call vanity pyromaniacs. It might be that they burn because they may get some type of notoriety. Say a firefighter, and I said firefighter. It doesn't mean all firefighters, but there have been times where you have like one person in a fire company who was actually setting fires, so they could then in turn respond to those fires to help put them out, so they could be like a hero. Conceal other crimes, and there was one just a few months back, I believe, where there was a property that was burned, and inside the burned property were 2 dead people. And there's a very controversial issue up in North Jersey where there was a guy, I think he was president of the board or something of Cooper Hospital, and he and his wife were both found dead after a fire in their house. So there was an arson, but they both had gunshot or knife wounds and were both dead. So there was obviously a murder there. The question is whether it was a murder-suicide or a murder by a third party. That's still under investigation. So if some third party did it, or even if one of the parties killed the other party and killed themselves, they might have set the house on fire so it would look like they died in a fire rather than, and that way they wouldn't embarrass their kids or whatever. So, but that one, they're still looking at it because they're really not sure what happened there. Another way and reason to commit arson, as I mentioned earlier, defrauding insurance companies. That's very common. Again, I don't know what the actual numbers are. The slide says most common. But let's say, somebody, they can't pay for the car anymore. They don't want to have it. They don't want to have the car taken back by the finance company. So they steal it or have somebody else steal it. They take it somewhere isolated and burn it, and then they can collect on their insurance and pay off the finance company and still wind up getting a new car. All right, part two offenses, less serious, many misdemeanors. UCR, again, these are only the ones where if you're arrested, it winds up in part two. Prostitution, drug crimes, stuff like that. Other sources, there are various other ways that we collect data. And I think all of you should be aware of the Clery Act, which collects data on crimes on college campuses. You have the Crime Awareness and Campus Security Act of 1990. You have Campus Sexual Assault Victims Bill of Rights. And you have Campus Security Statistics website where you can find the data. But all colleges and universities, all places of higher education are required to report incidents of crime on their campus, and that data is required to be available to the student body. So ITT actually has a place on the student portal where you can click through and see the crime data from every school in the ITT school in the country. All right, unreported crime. Again, we talked about that dark figure. That's when people don't report the crimes. It's not going to be in the statistics. Self-report surveys do provide some information on this from anonymous people, and sometimes we're surveying to find out what crimes have been committed by certain people. Problems with self-survey. A lot of times they're doing it with teenagers, young people. A lot of times it's focusing on petty crimes, juvenile delinquency, and we don't know whether it's accurate or not. So it becomes a problem. Social dimensions of crime. Now, the regular project for this class studies or asks you to look at social dimensions of crime. That's basically the aspects of crime and victimization as they relate to significant social attributes by groups and are defined and according to which individuals are assigned a group membership. Yeah, that's a lot. Basically, we're looking at what characteristics, what groups do people belong to. Just look around your classroom when you come to class. You know, we have white people, we have Latinos, we have black people. Very few Asians in this school, which is interesting. But we have people of various ethnicities and races. We have a combination of males and females. I think in my last intro class, it was more males than females. We have various age groups. In this class, you look around, you see a couple of older heads and some really young people, and a sprinkling of folks in between. You have people coming from various income and wealth areas. I don't think any of us in this class are fairly wealthy, or maybe we wouldn't be trying to reinvent ourselves and get into a new profession. Also, we may another social dimension might be what profession are you in? What social class or social standing do you have? In the course project that's written for this course, and I will be providing alternatives to this time around, but the course project asks you to look at one of four social dimensions, and they are gender, race or ethnicity, age, and social class. So you're going to research on how that particular characteristic relates to crime, good or bad. All right, correlations. This is an important statistical thing we're going to look at more next week with the study of research. But correlation is when we have a connection or association observed between two measurable variables, and it could be either a positive way or a negative way. And hopefully in the classroom, I'll show you some examples on the board. But it might be, think of the example that in the summertime, all right, there's a lot of things that go on in the summertime. Temperature goes up, sales of ice cream go up, increase of visitation to the seashore go up, and crime goes up. All those things are in a positive manner. And you might also look at another one that the amount of clothing that people wear goes down. So there are correlations that during the summer, all those things happen. All right, 4 of them were positive, going in a positive direction, and the last one with the less clothing was going in a negative direction. But correlation is just showing that they're the same thing, that there are things that are happening at the same time, and those things are measurable. It doesn't necessarily mean that any one of them causes the other. It doesn't mean that any one of them causes the other. And that's a concept that we call spurious correlations. Maybe that just happen to happen at the same time. Now, you might draw a connection. Temperature goes up and crime goes up. There is a lot of data to support that they are related. But crime goes up and ice cream sales go up. Can you make a connection there? Is it the ice cream sales that cause more crime, or is it crime causes more ice cream sales? Probably not related. And I hopefully you get that. If you don't get it, write the question down, because this is a really good topic. I have a really good video to show you on spurious correlations. It's really awesome. And you can see how things may look like they're related, but they have absolutely no relationship whatsoever. And it's actually pretty funny. So if you want to search for it and watch it ahead of time, which will spoil it for you, if you just look up spurious correlations on YouTube, you'll probably find it. All right, age and crime. This is one of your social dimensions. Age is negatively related to crime. As age goes up, crime goes down. We have something called desistance. Most forms of criminology decrease with age. Elderly can be involved in crime, but they're less likely to be out in the street robbing people. Generally, elderly people commit crimes requiring special skills or knowledge. So somebody, I don't know if I want to call myself elderly, older, but usually older people are going to commit crimes that have to do with some skill set that they have. So if I'm like Bernie Madoff, I'm really good with stocks, I'm really good with selling things to people, then maybe I come up with a stock fraud scheme. There was a lawyer over in Marlton, New Jersey, who was helping his clients to make investments, but he was stealing their money. He had special skills and he had special rights because of being a lawyer. You know, those are all things that may have to do with your skill set rather than your age. So age and crime, you will see if you decide to study it, they're generally negatively related. Most crime is committed by people who are either teenagers or young adults. And after the age of 25, those numbers start to drop significantly. Gender and crime. Well, gender is what we call the best single predictor of criminality. Why? Because it's fairly easy to say that if there was a crime, that a male committed it. That's, if you want to profile anybody with regard to crime, males are the easiest ones to profile. Because if there's a crime, more than likely a male committed it. So, regardless of race or ethnicity or any other factors, if I am driving through a neighborhood and I just found out that a car was broken into, and I see a male running down the street, and I see a female running down the street, and they're not together, it's very much to my success of being a police officer to stop the male, because it's more likely that the male committed it. Does that mean the female couldn't have committed it? No. Females can commit crimes. Females have been involved in burglaries. Females have been involved in homicides. But the numbers, the sheer numbers, show that most crime is committed by men. Rates of crime by females have really not changed that much, even though women have taken a greater place in our society, have more power in society, higher paying jobs, the whole 9 yards compared to, long ago. We have not seen significant increases in crime by females. We also see that women are victimized less frequently than men, except for cases of, say, rape and spousal abuse. Most crime victims are men as well. Like when you tie gender and race, and that's been talked about quite a bit recently, that most homicides tend to be black male on black male. And you might want to question the data. I'm just taking that off the top of my head based upon the stuff that I heard. Nibbers will tell us, because one of the things in NIBRS can actually give us that information because it might tell us, what was the race of the victim, what's the race of the actor. Race and crime, I just tied this back together. Some people say there's a link between crime and race. There's a race-based disparity in arrest and incarceration. But the question is this because that people of a certain race are more likely to commit crimes? Is it because that people of a certain race find themselves in a social situation that then causes them to commit crimes? Or is it because the system is racist and attacks or goes after people of one race harder than all the rest? Those are serious questions, and I'm wondering, think about those questions, because I like to discuss those questions in class. What is the most likely answer to the question why we have such a disparity in who gets arrested and who's incarcerated? Differential treatment by the justice system, or not? William Wilbanks wrote a book called The Myth of Racist Criminal Justice System, but there are actually more recent articles on the same topic, and like I said, the National Review article does cover this as well. Race-crime relationship is a source of divisiveness, and that's going on right now. Increased fear of crime among African Americans, and this is not only because of how African Americans are treated by other races, but how are African Americans treated within their own community. And that's covered in the National Review article as well. Social class and crime. Prior to 1960, we actually assumed that there was a correlation between someone's social class and crime, that people who were of lower class committed more crimes. In self-report studies in the 60s, self-reported crime was consistent across all social classes. Class-crime relationship may be the result of discretionary practices. So here we go again. Is it the fact when we see that crime tends to be committed more by, or people get arrested that are in lower classes than higher classes, is it because that police are more likely to let go somebody who's of a higher class than somebody of a lower class? So if I got, as an example, if I'm a police officer and I am, let's say, working Route 73 in Mount Laurel, and a dude comes up driving, a beat-up 1981 Chrysler minivan that's like falling apart. He's doing 75 miles an hour in a 50. Am I more likely to write him a ticket than the guy in the suit driving the Porsche at the same speed? Question. What do you think? I know what I would do. Well, what do you think I would do? All right, so is it because of the discretion that police officers are more likely to give a break to somebody in a higher class, and that's why more lower class people get arrested? Same thing could be said in the previous slide with regard to race. Recent research supports that there is a class-crime relationship.